Welcome to this week's End of Days Update, coming to you from Tulsa, Oklahoma. We had such a great time last week there in Oakland, Iowa at Fellowship Church. People were so hungry, had cool miracles, great to be with them. We're coming to you every week to look at the different things that point to the coming of the Lord, specifically the gathering of nations for the Ezekiel 38 war. Because the rapture of the church is signless, but the second coming has tons of signs. And we can see that the Ezekiel 38 war happens right after the rapture. I know people differ in variations of what they think will happen there, but basically, Russia says to America, America says to Russia, are you come down and take a spoil? Well, right now, if Russia attacked Israel, we wouldn't say, are you come to take a spoil? We would attack Russia. Half of our country's gone because of the rapture when that happens. So many things are happening. What an exciting time. I mean, what a wonderful time to be lifting up our heads. The whole reason we get into end time information, Jesus said, lift up your heads, your redemption's drawing nigh, indicating you could be downtrodden when you're living when all of these verses are coming to pass. You're living when more verses are coming to pass right in front of your eyes than any other time in history. So it's super exciting. Radically excited to see God's Word come to pass right in front of your eyes. So let's pick up with what's happened around Israel. Man, so much stuff is happening. I'm going to try to slow down and go through it, but you had a massive explosion yesterday in Lebanon. Wow, I mean, so much happening in Lebanon right now because you had troops come from Hezbollah over into Israel last week. They did it again this week. Israel took them out again with fighter planes and helicopters. But the explosion was so big in Lebanon. Obviously, it was some kind of a munitions building. It had sodium nitrate that exploded. They said you could feel the blast from Greece. And it blew out windows, blew out patios, blew out cars right there on the freeway. A friend of mine that has a missionary there said that he wasn't there locally, but his friend said it was unbelievable. So people thought maybe Israel had something to do with it. Usually when Israel does stuff to buildings like that, they make sure people are out of the buildings. Like all the stuff happening in Iran, you'll notice every single one of those explosions, the buildings are completely empty. So Israel has offered their assistance, even though Hezbollah troops from Lebanon are coming into Israel the last 2 weeks. So you have a continuation of that. And now they've been talking about doing that. So they're doing exactly what they said they were going to do. But Israel's going to respond pretty radically this time compared to 2006. So along with that, you had Lebanon's foreign minister resign, said that the country's on the brink of collapse. Now this was before that explosion. And reason being, he said, Hezbollah has siphoned $93 billion from the Lebanese government to get missiles to try to annihilate Israel. Absolutely insane. But it's going to be a different showdown this time. Israel's not going to do tit for tat. They're going to smoke it. So along with that, Israel did another airstrike on the northern part of Syria. It took out Iranian militiamen there. About 15 of them got killed. And this is right up on the very top of the border between Iraq and Syria. Literally, there's 10 to 20,000 troops, Iranian militia troops, right there on the western bank of the Euphrates River. So they're all building up these troops because their thought pattern is they're going to march down and annihilate Israel. Well, that's not going to happen. So Israel's preemptively striking over and over and over again to stop that and to slow down that massive weaponry coming down from Iran into Syria, into Lebanon, where Lebanon has those precise fittings for their missiles so they can fire at Israel. So you see Israel doing what it has to do to protect itself. Far more stuff is going on, though. I mean, you have another explosion in Tehran yesterday. That's about the 12th. I can't even keep up with how many buildings are being blown up through sabotage because Israel's having to slow down the thought pattern of Iran to take out Israel. So one thing after another keeps happening like that. But so many other things are going on. It literally is hard to keep up with. You had earthquakes in Turkey, earthquakes in Japan. You had a volcano erupt in Japan. You had an earthquake in Alaska. You remember we talked about the deadly flies that came over England? You had swarms of locusts again, an outbreak of that. Crazy. You had floods, massive floods in India. Along with that, you had more stuff happening globally that points to a change coming. This is crazy. You had asteroids do a flyby this last week. A huge asteroid field had 2 asteroids that flew within 26,000 miles of the Earth. Now that's 11% of the distance between the Earth to the Moon, and they saw them 2 days before they came through. So I say that because there's going to be an asteroid hit during the tribulation, actually more than one. But so you're watching everything unfold for that right in front of your eyes. In the midst of that, you see such a fight going on in Israel over Benjamin Netanyahu and Benjamin Gantz. But remember, we talked about Rabbi Yitzhak Kaduri that prophesied that Israel will be ruled by two Benjamins right before the coming of the Lord. So remember, Jesus said, you can tell what the weather's going to be, but you don't know your hour, your visitation. So he wanted them to know. So we look at all these things around Israel because they blatantly point to what the Bible said would happen just before the Messiah comes. Well, we know it's the second coming, so my goodness, there's so much going on. Many more things happening. If you got into all the stuff about the coronavirus, got into all the stuff about the EU, came out with 15 countries from the EU condemned Israel over building in the West Bank. Now the West Bank is Israel's property because they won it back in the Six-Day War. I don't have time to even go through all the anti-Semitism of defaming different places all over the planet, but you have crazy stuff happening even in America, like Portland. They went from protesting and rioting to burning Bibles this last week. So we're watching it unfold, a setup for what would happen just before the tribulation period. So we're blessed. Jesus said, lift up your head. So what do we go? We always go to the scripture. I mean, symptoms of the tribulation come and go, but the Bible never changes. So what are the signs of the coming of the Lord? Number one, Israel made a nation, regathered in our lifetime. Jerusalem won back. Jesus said the generation that sees those two events will not pass away till all is fulfilled. But you have many more. You have the Hebrew language restored. You got the Ethiopian Jews brought back. You got the fertility of the land of Israel. You got the revival of the Roman Empire. Amazing. The Capitol building is identical to the Tower of Babel in Strasbourg, France. So you have all these things. You have predatory birds. 172 different species of predatory birds showed up in the land a few years ago. You got foxes showing up on the Temple Mount. That's Lamentations 5:18. You had fish show up in the Dead Sea. You had the ritual baths around the Temple Mount fill up with water. There's so much. You had yesterday, you have Jupiter and Saturn trying to collide. Two different kinds of authority. Jupiter being king authority. You've got king authority getting ready to overtake satanic authority of the earth. So many things happening that you don't have time to get into. Remember, men will be lovers themselves with selfie sticks. So you got tangible physical signs pointing to the King of Kings coming back to the earth. So you go from signs, though. There's many more. It's hard to get into all of them because there's so many. But you have signals. You had blood red moons on Passover and Tabernacles. We get into that every week. When's the last time you had 4 in a row? NASA called that a tetrad. 1967 when Jerusalem was won back. 1948 when Israel was made a nation. 1492 at the Edict of Expulsion when the Jews were kicked out of Spain. So you have major events coinciding with things happening with Israel, warning signs basically. Then you had the Bethlehem star last year, first time in 2,000 years. Jupiter, Regulus, Venus came together. Amazing. NBC Nightly News. So we have a celestial event, Jupiter, Regulus, and Venus. So wild. This time the constellation was Leo. He's the lion of the tribe of Judah. When Jesus was born, it was the sign Virgo. Many more things keep happening. So I don't have time to get into all the September 23rd things that happen that show us that Israel can't even police the Temple Mount. I even forgot about Jordan talked to Israel again saying, hey, you can't have the Temple Mount. The Al Mosque is for Islam. But you had an Islamic imam say, hey, we don't have any tie to the Temple Mount. You're going to watch in the days ahead. Everything will unfold about that piece of real estate around the Temple Mount because Jesus is about to come back. Think about it. We're about to see him who was and is to come. The whole earth is full of his glory. He's the brightness of the glory of God. He gives us all this information because he loves you so much and wants you expectant. He wants you happy. He wants you hopeful, wants you comforted. Had one guy say, Joe, if you teach on end times, you just get everybody's hopes up. Duh, that's exactly right. It's the hope that purifies you even as you're pure. Well, what do? Help our local church, help our local pastor, get the message out. This is not an escape theology. This is a hustle mentality. When you see the finish line, you run faster, not slower. So we're so privileged and so blessed to watch the finish line coming right toward us because the King is coming back so soon. Man, we'll pick up with what's happened this next week. I know we'll have more explosions in Iran, probably more explosions in Lebanon. And we'll see what happens here right before the coming of the Lord. Have a blessed week. See you next Wednesday.
Thanks for joining us today at the End of Days Update. If you'd like to be notified every time there's a new post, just go to the EDU at josephmorris.com and subscribe to receive email alerts. If these posts and updates have been a blessing to you, please consider making a one-time donation to help get the message out or even becoming a monthly partner with Joseph Morris Ministries. Thanks again for tuning in to the EDU, and we'll see you next week.